here's the reality. The Fed has hit the panic button. They've been doing 25 basis points, 1%, up or down for a very long period of time. To go 50 when you pivot, when you go from rate hikes to rate cuts, to do 50 all at once, basically exposes the fact that they're behind the curve.
I'm going to bring in Jim Rickards now, talk a little bit about the greatest stimulus to buying gold, I think, right now. The Fed rate cut of 50 basis points, quite unexpected. Jim, what's your take on this? And
Sure. Peter, I like to do this kind of analysis by comparing narrative to the reality. So the narrative is basically a made-up story. It could come from Wall Street or Washington. The reality is based on hard data and will actually play out. The reality always wins in the long run, but in the short run, the narrative can win. So here's the narrative. The narrative is the Federal Reserve cut interest rates 50 basis points, 0.5% on Wednesday. This is supposed to provide stimulus. People borrow more, spend more. The stock market went up a little bit, et cetera. So it's all good. It's also a compliment to the Fed in the sense that they've engineered a soft landing. By the way, there's no such thing as a soft landing. You can keep flying, you can crash hard, but we don't have soft landings. But they've engineered a soft landing. Wall Street also calls it the Goldilocks narrative. Not too cold, not too hot, but just right. Okay, so that's the narrative. Here's the reality. The Fed has hit the panic button. They've been doing 25 basis points, 1%, up or down for a very long period of time. To go 50 when you pivot, when you go from rate hikes to rate cuts, to do 50 all at once, basically exposes the fact that they're behind the curve. They're in a little bit of a panic mode. Now, Jay Powell, the chairman of the Fed, had a long press conference. And reporters actually did a decent job of asking him, well, because he said the economy's solid, the labor market is solid, everything's normalizing, it's all good, in other words. And they're like, well, if it's all good, why are you cutting 50 basis points? And he said, well, we want to keep it that way. That's the narrative. The reality is the economy is slowing very rapidly. There are a lot of technical indicators, but, the price of oil has gone from in the past year from $90 a barrel to about $69 a barrel. People say, that's good, lower gas prices at the pump. Well, it's not good if you don't have a job, if unemployment's going up. By the way, it's going down for the wrong reasons. This is demand-driven. People are driving less, they want less, and plenty of supply. That's not even an issue. So that's a sign.
Jim, let me ask you a question now. Is your forecast for recession or inflation or both?
Recession with a disinflation, possible deflation. Now, in the long run, we're going to have inflation because that's the only way out of the debt problem. But in the short run, we're looking at inflation to come down a lot, which is disinflation, maybe even deflation, definitely recession. We're either in one or you can see it on the horizon. And it's going to catch a lot of people by surprise. And it's bad for the economy, but it's good for the Trump campaign because the U.S. economy is bigger than anything. You can talk about they're all important issues, taxes, border, tariffs, all important issues. But the U.S. economy as a whole is, first of all, slowing down. Secondly, heading into recession. Again, the oil price decline is a sign of that. People look at all these things. The Fed doesn't drive the economy. They follow the economy. Interest rates were already coming down a lot. They're still coming down. It's called a flattening yield curve. It's going to be positively sloped. But why are interest rates coming down? Because the big money in the markets know that the economy is going to hit a recession, and rates are coming down. So you want to lock in higher yields right now. And by the way, Peter, you're absolutely right about gold. Gold hit an all-time high intraday on Wednesday afternoon when the Fed cut rates. It was up around 26.60, which is an all-time high. It's still, kind of in that range, 26.40 this morning, but it's very bullish for gold and bearish for the economy, unfortunately.
It's a big issue, and it is coming very quickly. We've spent 30 years talking about globalization, so extend the supply chains, capital goes wherever it wants. This has obviously devastated U.S. manufacturing, U.S. jobs, but that was the theme. Now we're seeing the downside of globalization. It used to be the case that one country or maybe the European Union could go into a recession, but the U.S. could pull us out, or maybe China could pull us out, et cetera. But now we're seeing a synchronized global recession. China is literally collapsing. I don't mean the end of China, but they're arresting bankers. They basically revoked all the passports of all the bankers in China. They're not allowed to leave the country. Investment bankers and so forth. The real estate sector is collapsing. Europe, Germany's been in and out of recession, but growth is around zero at best, falling into recession. So that brings us to the United States. Now, technically, GDP is still estimated to be positive for the third quarter of 2024. But without being too geeky, there's something called GDI, gross domestic income. And gross domestic income and gross domestic product should be about the same. There are always differences in leads and lags, but right now they've diverged. Gross domestic income is going down, and gross domestic product still going up a little bit. When that divergence arises, it has to reconverge at some point. It's usually because gross domestic product collapses and kind of meets up with gross domestic income. You've seen you're familiar with the jobs report. Jobs are much weaker, but all of those jobs, over 100% of those jobs, when you net creation and losses, are going to illegal immigrants. And a lot of them, almost all of them, are part-time jobs instead of full-time jobs. And then June and July were revised downwards. So if the 86,000 jobs disappear. So if you subtract those from what they say they created in August, we're almost at the point of net job losses. So, and just again, without being too technical, there's something, you know this, the yield curve. So it's basically looking at different maturities and different interest rates. The yield curve is supposed to go up, meaning the longer you borrow, the higher the interest rate. About a year and a half ago, it became inverted, which meant longer rates, 10-year notes, 5-year notes, were actually lower interest rates than 3-month notes and 6-month notes. That happens, but it's very unusual. But it's a sign that a recession is coming. The big money, sovereign wealth funds and so forth, is saying, hey, I'll take that 3.5%, 4% coupon on the 10-year note because that's going to look really sweet when interest rates collapse to 2%. It's warning you the recession is coming. The Ukrainians are not winning. They haven't been from the start. The Russians are moving on all fronts. The F-16 cache is the latest in a long line of so-called wonder weapons that the U.S. or NATO allies have provided to Ukraine. Each one, when they rolled it out, the HIMARS artillery, precision-guided missiles. Well, it turns out the Russians can jam the GPS, so those missiles just kind of go off into cornfields or whatever. Right. The Abrams tanks, the Leopard tanks, Challenger tanks, all left burning on the battlefield because of mines, drones, Russian fortifications, etc. The Attackmans missiles are supposed to strike deep inside of Russia. Russians are very good at shooting them down. So there's a lot more, but you can down the list. Every one of those NATO weapons have failed. And by the way, that should raise major concerns inside NATO. Forget about what's going on in Ukraine. How are you supposed to perform your mission of defending Europe when your weapons are completely inferior to the Russians? So what happened? What was the latest wonder weapon? It was the F-16. Zelensky's been banging the table, give me F-16s. Well, he got some, and it took a long time to train the pilots. They put them up, and literally within a day or two of flying, one of them was shot down. Their top pilot, called name Moonfish, was killed in that crash. But here's the irony. He was shot down by a Patriot, a Ukrainian Patriot anti-missile battery. There was no communication between the Ukrainian Air Force and the operators of the battery, so they shut down their own. They shut down their own plane. Correct. And by the way, the stuff we provide them, the Patriot anti-missile batteries, they don't work against Russian hypersonic missiles. They can shoot down cruise missiles about 500-600 miles an hour, but these hypersonic missiles are coming in at 4,000, 5,000 miles per hour. The Patriots cannot shoot them down, and one by one, the Russians have been blowing up the Patriot missile systems, anti-missile systems, which are $1 billion each. They've blown up about 7 of them. So there's $7 billion just in flames because they can't stop a Russian hypersonic missile. So the other thing, the Western media is talking about this invasion of Kursk, the Kursk area of Russia, where Ukraine has moved in. This is supposed to be a turning point. They'll put pressure on Putin, destabilize Putin, and all that, which is all nonsense. The invasion's real, but Putin's more popular than ever. But I can't find anyone in the West, Victoria Nuland, Anthony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, who knows anything about Russia. They don't know.
Of
they
course
don't know
not.
The Russian way of war. The Russian way of war is they're usually on the back foot. Then they're slow, methodical, and deadly. They take their time. They don't work on anyone else's schedule.
Yeah.
So what's happening now is that Kursk, which are basically the creme de la creme of the reserves of the Ukrainian army. They're being surrounded, creating what's called a cauldron. Beginning about October 1st, they're going to be annihilated. So this is going to be move the war, the Ukrainian defeat, a lot closer. So it's just a disaster. But what troubles me, well, that troubles me enough. 500,000 dead Ukrainians and several $100 billion of wasted U.S. money. But the American people are not ready for this because they've been lied to by the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Economist, Financial Times. Basically, the Western media have not been honest about what's actually going on there. Yeah, we probably are going into a recession. There are a lot of indicators. Gross domestic product is still reported kind of up, not a lot, but a little bit. But there's something called gross domestic income. They're supposed to be the same, but roughly the same, but they're not. There's a big divergence, and gross domestic income is much worse. History shows that when gross domestic income is lower, it's usually the one that's correct, and it's a sure sign of a recession. So that could surprise a lot of people. The stock market's at an all-time high. I understand that, but stock market's usually the last to know, believe it or not. So we can see major recessionary signs, higher unemployment starting later this week.